afternoon, or morning my time, Pacific time. And thanks so much for Erica's help and Robin's help in setting this up, and Joshua for facilitating the call and giving us all such great information. A couple of things I just want to mention. PubWest is sponsoring the webinar, and if you are on the line and you're not familiar with us, please go to pubwest.org and take a look. I am the executive director, and if I can help out with any questions, please shoot me an email, kent@pubwest.org. We will also post the recording for this ebook quality assurance webinar, the last one we did on production workflows and tools, and the one that we did on Friday for the Simplify Royalty Management, to our email newsletter, and that will go out on Thursday morning. If you're interested in that, you can just add your email address to the box in the front of the homepage for pubwest.org. So now I'll turn it over to Joshua. Thanks so much, Joshua.
Thanks, Kent. So my name is Joshua Tallent. I am the Director of Outreach and Education for Firebrand Technologies, and really excited to be working with PubWest on a couple of production-related webinars. I'm really excited to see so many people signing up and coming to these. So thanks a lot for doing that. And if you're watching the video afterwards, just as excited to see you. As we mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, feel free to just go ahead and chat them out into the chat box, and we'll answer those at the end. If for some reason your question doesn't get answered, feel free to contact me directly or work through Patricia or whoever else, and we'll definitely get the questions answered that you have. And that goes as well for people who are watching the video after the fact. Definitely happy to answer any questions and help you guys understand more about these pretty complex topics sometimes. So today we're talking about the elements of ebook quality assurance. I want to discuss different aspects of QA, and quality assurance can be very big or can be very small. It depends on the type of book, and there's a lot of variables to go into this. But in general, there are four different types of four different topics we want to talk about. One is automated validation, being able to run your ebook file through some automated testing processes to ensure that it works and that it's appropriate for the different devices. Another is retailer requirements, because every retailer, the major retailers especially, have requirements that they require when you're selling files to their platforms. Sideloading to your devices and doing manual QA is a big part of the quality assurance process. We'll cover that in some detail. And then we'll talk about QA checklists and how you can create your own for your own work, for your publisher's work, checklists that you and your team can use when you're going through and checking each file to make sure that they work properly. So something you should be aware of is that quality assurance is probably one of the most important steps in any ebook production process. And it's very often that you see these news stories and issues out in the wild where some publisher forgot to do quality assurance, where they neglected to do it, and they have some sort of technical problem with the ebook file that they could have caught very early on. And if only they had done some QA, had tested it across the different devices, had worked on their production process to ensure that quality issues were not present, then they would have caught those things. And so all of these stories that you're seeing me pop up on the screen, these are very big stories in the press where something happened and a major publisher even forgot to do some QA and forgot to test things. So it doesn't just affect smaller publishers, it doesn't just affect individual independent authors, it affects everybody. So quality assurance is very important. All of us need to take some time to make sure that we're doing that step in the production process. So let's talk about quality assurance and validation tools. There are a couple of tools that you should have in your toolbox that you should constantly be using. And if you came to the webinar last week, we talked about production tools specifically, and we mentioned some of these validation tools as well. But there are specific tools that you want to make sure you're using for the validation of your ebook file. The first and most important is epubcheck. epubcheck is the independent, it's the standard program in the industry. It's the one that's created and maintained by the IDPF, which is the International Digital Publishing Forum. IDPF maintains it. It's up to date. It actually just got an update recently in the last month or so. It was updated to version 4. epubcheck is a Java program, which means you need to install the Java runtime engine to run it on your computer. But once you do that, then you can run the run the program yourself from your desktop and test your files. It tests EPUB files. It also has some other functionality. You can use, if you use the help tag inside of your command line prompt, you can actually see other things you can do. You can get very robust and verbose output from epubcheck, or you can get more minimized output. I'll just kind of do a quick check. Flight Deck is a program that we at Firebrand created that goes a lot deeper than epubcheck. And I can tell you a whole lot more on this about Flight Deck offline, or you can go check it out at ebookflightdeck.com. It's a great tool for testing your files. It does all the epubcheck testing. It tests everything through epubcheck and then gives you the output from that, but also does a lot of best practices and has a full suite of tests that are specifically for each retailer. I give you a lot of feedback on that. Kindle Previewer is the default test program for Kindle books. So if you're testing a Kindle file or you're converting an EPUB file into the Kindle format, the Kindle Previewer is an emulator. You install it on your computer. You can drop an EPUB file or a Kindle file onto it. It'll do a conversion if necessary into the Kindle format. It'll open it up and let you test the file and emulate it as if you're looking at the book on a Kindle device. Adobe Digital Editions is an important tool for just doing a quick load up an EPUB file on your desktop just to take a look at it and see if it looks the way you expect it to. It obviously is not the only tool you want to use for that. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but it's a great tool for doing that. The Radium Chrome extension is another option for this. If you have Chrome as a browser on your computer, Mac or PC, you can install the Radium extension, and that allows you to open up EPUB files inside your browser window. And the Radium Chrome extension is really, it's very robust. It has a lot of great features. It supports EPUB 3 almost across every piece of EPUB 3 right now. So very good, very helpful for opening up a file, taking a look at it. iBooks for the Mac. If you're on the Macintosh, if you're on an Apple computer, then you can use iBooks for the Mac on your desktop or laptop. This is not exactly the same display as you would see in iBooks on an iPad, but it is a great way of kind of an alternative to both Adobe Digital Editions and the Radium Chrome extension for just another program to open up an EPUB really quick, see if it is looking the way you expect it to or function the way you expect it to. And then Book Proofer is a tool from Apple. If you have an iTunes Connect account, you can get Book Proofer directly from Apple, and that's for specifically testing your books that you're going to sell through the iBooks platform. So if you're selling an EPUB through the Apple platform and you want to test it, you can use Book Proofer to do that. So automated validation, again, let's talk about epubcheck real quick. This is the way you can run an epubcheck tool on your computer. You go download it from the GitHub repository, install it on your computer in a folder, and then call the path of that epubcheck jar file, the Java file, and call the path in addition to the EPUB file itself. So this is it may be a little more technical than some people are comfortable with. There are other alternatives, of course, to this, but if you're comfortable, it's a great way. It's a free tool. Go grab it. And then there's a forum for epubcheck questions and issues. If you run into a bug or you're trying to figure out you see something that's wrong with the testing that doesn't match what it should be doing, then there's a way of getting that information as well. Flight Deck, I mentioned that before. Another great tool for testing your EPUB files. And then it's something I should mention here that it's not. I don't mention it directly in the presentation, but there's a tool called Pagina EPUB Checker that you can download for free as well. And Pagina is basically it's a wrapper for epubcheck. So it takes the epubcheck testing tool and creates a little executable file you can put on your computer, Mac or PC, and just drop an EPUB file onto it and it'll run it. So if you're not comfortable running things in Java or opening up the command line or terminal to do those kinds of tests with epubcheck, then you can get Pagina to kind of be the intermediary for you. Let's talk about retailer requirements. Every retailer has some sort of requirements as to what they accept or don't accept, what kinds of EPUB files they can sell and which ones they can't sell. So let's talk through each of the major ones real quick and kind of hit the high points of things you should be aware of, things you should pay attention to when you're testing your files, to get them out for sale in these different retailers. So Apple has a spec that's available to registered iBooks publishers. If you have an iTunes Connect account and you're registered as a publisher with them, that you can log in and get access to their documentation. Unfortunately, it's not available for anyone else. If you look around in different places online, you'll see people referencing it and also talking about different specs and stuff that they require. But if you need access to it, I would recommend that you get an Apple account, get signed up as a publisher with Apple. One thing that they are very picky on is references to other retailers. So if you have a reference to Amazon and it's a link to the Amazon website, whether it's linking to a book or just linking to Amazon.com, you will probably get it. The book will probably be rejected by Apple. So something to pay attention to in your testing. Make sure that you're looking for those kinds of links. The guide or landmark section, Apple recommends that you include this section in your EPUB files. This is the little section either in the OPF or in the HTML navigation table of contents document that tells the reading system, tells the software or the application or the device where the table of contents is and where the start reading location of the book is, sometimes where the cover image is as well. So I do highly recommend you include the guide or landmark section in your EPUB files. If you have video or audio content in your EPUB file, Apple says that they don't want fallbacks added. This gets a little more technical, but basically if you're building your EPUB file or your if you're building the EPUB file to sell to the Apple platform, don't include the fallbacks that you would normally include for other retailers. Apple has a limit on the number of pixels that each image is allowed to be. So every image in your book cannot be larger than 4 million. What that means is the height of the image has to be less than 4 million total. So just multiply the width times the height. Some tools like Flight Deck will actually tell you if there's a problem with that kind of these kinds of issues, but you can also just run it if you're opening up your images in Photoshop. You can see these as well and see what the sizes are. 10 megabytes of images per HTML file is the recommendation from Apple. Essentially what this means is every chapter of your book is typically its own HTML file. If you have an HTML file that has more than 10 megabytes of image content that it has to load, then every time you turn to a new chapter, iBooks will have to slow down, and it loads the entire chapter into memory so that you can turn the pages within that chapter more easily. And if you have more than 10 megabytes of image content, it can really slow down that image loading and page loading process. So it's best to keep your maximum number of images, total megabytes of your images, down to 10 megabytes or less, which is not typically a problem in a lot of books, but on an image-heavy nonfiction book, that could be a problem. Image optimizations are recommended by Apple. They actually recommend a tool called Image Optim. That's a tool you can buy for your Macintosh computer. There are other image optimization tools you can use. Essentially, they just want to make sure that you're making images that are not too large, that have good quality, that are they're optimized for reading on the screen, looking at us on the screen, and things like that. Let's talk about Amazon. Amazon's requirements for the Kindle are available at amazon.com/Kindle Publishing. They have the Kindle Publishing guidelines there as a PDF document you can download. It's a fairly long document. It has a lot of good information about building Kindle files, both very simple stuff and also very complex. They talk about all of the different specs that they have as well. Something to note is the Kindle Format 8, while it is very similar to EPUB, is not exactly EPUB. It has a lot of similarities. They have a lot of sharing of code because they're both based on the same basic open ebook platform or standard. But you should recognize that building an EPUB file and then automatically converting to the Kindle format, you may run into some things that you don't necessarily want. So you want to be cautious about not just assuming that your book is going to look good across all the Kindle devices if you build an EPUB file. I do recommend testing your Kindle books and running it through Kindle Preview or Kindle Gen to look at it and make sure that you test it properly. The maximum file size that Kindle recommends, Amazon recommends, is 350 megabytes. You're only going to run into this if you have massive amounts of images, like thousands of images, or if you have a lot of video content. So you're typically never going to get even close to 650 megabytes, but just be aware that that is the maximum size that they allow. If you're using the Kindle digital publishing platform, then your upload size at maximum is 50 megabytes. So if you're selling as a publisher and you have a direct publisher account, you can go to 650. But if you're uploading to KDP, you have a maximum of 50. And again, typically this is not going to be a major problem unless you have a lot of content that's very image heavy or very media heavy in your book. The maximum recommended image size for Kindle is 5 megabytes. So this is per image. They don't have a maximum amount of image content per chapter like Apple does that they recommend. What they recommend is just don't make any image larger than 5 megabytes. And they do also say to include the guide or the landmark section with your table of contents and your start location and your cover location. Kindle also doesn't support some CSS that you might include. So a pretty common example of this is max height or max width that you might set on images to set the image width and image height. Just some CSS won't be, it'll be ignored completely or stripped out of the file when it's converted. And you'll get an error message about this whenever you use the Kindle Gen tool or Kindle Previewer to convert an EPUB into the Kindle platform. It'll tell you if there's some CSS in your document that it won't support. JavaScript is not supported on the Kindle platform at all right now. PostScript fonts, so if it's an open type font with CFF data, this is PostScript font data, then it will be stripped out and ignored as well. So you want to make sure that if you're using open type fonts, which I do recommend, that your open type fonts have true type font tables. It's kind of a technical thing, but this is just kind of an important thing to understand about your fonts. And usually you can convert your fonts into open type with true type font tables if you need to do that. Image scaling is done percentage on only one side, and this is kind of a weird quirk of the Kindle system is setting the percentage on the width or the height will scale the image appropriately. The newer devices as well, I think they support also the viewport height and viewport width as well, not just percentage. So these are things that you can, when you start delving into how to build really good ebook files, you'll run into images very quickly as being a pretty consistent problem. And maybe at some point in the future we'll do a webinar about how to deal with images, but this is one of their requirements. And if you have media content, video or audio content, it's only available in the Mobi Pocket 7 format. This is the older Kindle format. It's just not allowed in the Kindle format 8 due to a limitation in their systems. Barnes & Noble doesn't really have a spec. There is some documentation available for different types of things in the Barnes & Noble platform, but they don't have a spec per se or even a real recommendation document. So there's nothing really to go off of. Some things that we do know, though, they are still using the ARM SDK, the Adobe Reader Mobile SDK. This is still in use in their system. They don't technically support EPUB 3 because they're running on an older version of the ARM SDK. But if you build an EPUB 3 file and you include some backwards compatibility into it, then it will be accepted by Barnes & Noble. And so we could talk about that more later as well. Small caps are probably the biggest issue in this kind of situation. Because they're using the older Reader Mobile SDK, they don't support the CSS, the style sheet rules that are used in more modern applications for showing something small caps. So if you really have to have small caps in your book when it's displayed on the Nook platform, you would have to do a hack. I don't typically recommend that anymore. It's just way too much work. But if it's absolutely necessary, then you would have to do a hack because they don't support the CSS like you would need them to. Embedded fonts are turned off by default in your book, and Barnes & Noble actually has a publisher defaults setting in the setting for each book. Whenever you are a reader, when you open up a book for the first time, you can go in and look at the settings, and then publisher defaults are turned off, which means pretty much all of your styling. They apply some default styling across the books when publisher defaults are turned off, and they turn off your font. So if you're using a special font that's very important to you, you may need to include a recommendation in the front of your book to say, hey, don't forget to turn on the publisher defaults to ensure that you're seeing the book as the designer intended it. Video and audio support is there, but only on their tablet applications for Android and iOS. So not on the Nook devices themselves, the e-Extreme devices. And the video and audio support's not really that great. So if you have video and audio content, you may have some difficulty getting that up for sale on the Barnes & Noble platform. For EPUB 3, again, they don't natively support it yet, but you can include an NCX file and make sure you don't have any JavaScript, and that should make it possible for someone who is reading an EPUB 3 file on the Nook to interact with the book properly, see the table of contents, and be able to use the book the way they need to. 20 megabytes is the limit, the upload limit for Nook Press. This is the KDP kind of self-publishing platform for the Barnes & Noble system. So if you're using Nook Press to get your book up for sale in the Nook system, then you can't have a larger than 20 megabytes, which, again, you shouldn't run into a problem with that unless you have a very image-heavy book to put up there. Kobo is a Canadian-based retailer, has a lot of really great features, especially EPUB 3 support. Their spec or their guidelines are available on GitHub, so you can go to this link. And again, you'll get a copy of this presentation in PDF format after the presentation's done. We'll send that out to you guys, so you can click on these links to go out to where they go. But Kobo has their specs online. epubcheck is not required, but it is recommended. I would recommend always testing your book with epubcheck, even if it's not required for some reason by a certain retailer. Always check it with epubcheck. It's a good thing to get in, a good process to get get used to doing. NCX and the nav documents are automatically created by the system for pieces. Is kind of a weird quirk of the whole Kobo system. If you have a place in your EPUB2 file where say an HTML file that you don't have a table of contents entry for that HTML, it will automatically create that HTML document it'll add that to the table of contents. Basically what this means is that you may run into some situations where if you have a lot of broken up HTML files in your book, that you're seeing a lot more entries in your table of contents in the Nook platform. Unfortunately, there's no way around that except to add those. Make sure that every HTML document in your book has a related table of contents entry in your NCX or in your navdoc. Font obfuscation is not currently supported. This is a way of locking down fonts so that they can't really be reused by readers, people who might rip open the file and try to pull the font file out and install it on their computer. Font obfuscation makes that very hard to do, but that's not supported in the Kobo system. This is important for people who are using InDesign to create their ebook files. If you're uploading EPUB from InDesign, then the Kobo platform won't support the obfuscation that's done automatically by InDesign, and you may have to go through a couple of steps. I actually wrote about this in a Digital Book World blog post a couple weeks back, and so you can go check that out and get some thoughts about how to deal with those font issues. Read aloud text color differences. If you're doing a children's book with read aloud with narration overlays that allow the text to be read and highlight the words as they're being read to the reader. The read aloud coloring is done in different ways by Kobo than it is by iBooks. So you may see some differences there. There are ways to kind of tweak it, but you may have to put up with a little bit of a difference in the color that's being displayed to the user as the text color is being changed with that narration. Audio and video, they do have some support for audio and video content, but they recommend using the EPUB switch tags, which allow you to do backwards compatibility and kind of say, okay, if the reading system doesn't support audio and video, then hey, show this picture instead, and maybe a link to an outside source or something. They have documentation in their spec guidelines on that. They have some support for JavaScript, and you could possibly use EPUB switch as well as a backup for that. I would recommend looking at their guidelines for more information. If you have tables more than 4 columns in a Kobo book, it will probably cut off the 5th and 6th and 7th or whatever columns of your table. So definitely do some side loading and testing your files. We'll talk about that in a second. Google's recommendations, they don't really have a spec. They do have some answers. They do say that you have to pass epubcheck in order to get the file into their system, so I do recommend doing that. They recommend using the text attribute in your guide to point to the first page location, the start reading location of your book. Other reading systems will say use body matter or use some other kind of attribute, but they recommend using text. They do have video and audio support in the Google app, and this is the Google Play Books app that you'll see in the Android system and the iOS system. And JavaScript currently is not supported, so if you're building JavaScript-enabled books, you would not be able to have that support in the Google platform. They do have a 20 megabyte upload limit for people using their standard upload process on their website, and they do fixed layout support. So if, just like Kobo and just like with Apple, they do have the ability to support fixed layout EPUB 3 files and support those natively. So definitely a good idea to sell a fixed layout children's book, for instance, across all 3 of those platforms. All right, let's talk about sideloading files. Trying not to rush, but I do have a lot of stuff I want to cover today. So sideloading, let's talk about sideloading first. Sideloading is where you take your EPUB or your Kindle file and you load it onto different devices to ensure that you are seeing on the device what you expect your readers to see. It's testing your ebook file to ensure that it looks the way it's supposed to look. Sideloading can be a kind of a difficult process sometimes, especially when you load the file into a device and then you see something wrong and then you have to go fix it and then you load it again. It can be a little bit of a back and forth. So a lot of times my recommendation is do some back and forth just on your computer before you start sideloading onto devices. So for instance, you use the iBooks for desktop version of iBooks, or use Adobe Digital Editions, or use the Redium Chrome plugin to load up your EPUB files just quickly. Just open it up, take a look at it, see if that color of that text was correct, or see if the box came out the way you expected it to, or if the image is centered. Do those kinds of very quick and easy and kind of quick and dirty testing on your computer first. And then when you're ready to go forward and you're ready to start making some changes and double checking on different devices, then go and start sideloading to the actual devices to do testing. The iPad is probably the most important quality assurance device that you can have, and a lot of people try to get away with not having an iPad because it can be fairly expensive. But my recommendation is that you get some sort of iPad. Now, I would recommend that you not just buy an iPad 1, first generation iPad. At this point, it's so old and it's so out of date that it'll be impossible to really get a good read for how the book reads on that device. But do get a more up-to-date version, even if it's a year out of date, as long as it gets updated to the latest version of iOS, which right now iOS version 9 just came out. If your iPad device will not update to the latest version of iOS, then it's time to update to a new iPad. And make sure you have a device that you can do testing on the latest versions of. The reason that this is so important is because you have support for a lot of different types of apps. It has the iBooks app, which is really important for selling through the iBook store. There's a Kindle app, there's a Nook app, Kobo, Google, and even Bluefire Reader. So all of the major ebook retailers have apps for the iPad, and a lot of readers use iPads to read their books. Now, some people might ask, what about having an iPad mini? Can I use the iPad mini for that? And yes, you can. The iPad mini, it would be essentially the same display as the standard iPad. And this would also go for the new business version, the very large screen, 12-inch or whatever screen that they just came out with as well. The display should look similar. Not exactly the same iPad. So there's some thoughts on the iPad. You should also get a Kindle of some kind. I would recommend getting a Kindle Fire of some type. I don't usually recommend the cheapest one, and Amazon just announced this past week, or maybe a week and a half ago, a brand new Kindle Fire that's like $50, and it's ad supported, and it's very kind of running on cheap operating system, cheap hardware and stuff. My recommendation is go ahead and get at least the $99 Kindle. Or go with the Kindle Fire HD or the 8.9-inch. You may actually want to get an 8.9-inch just because what you see there is going to probably be a little different than the 7-inch that they sell as well. So any type of Kindle Fire, I do recommend getting one and using it for testing. And then any kind of their Kindle Paperwhite or e-ink reader, something with an e-ink screen from Amazon. And whether that's the Paperwhite or whether that's the Voyage or whether that's the basic $69 Kindle, get one of them and use one of them, because what you see on the e-ink screen is going to be different in some cases than what you see in the Fire and other devices. It's best to have both of those. For Android, any good Android tablet is going to be fine. I usually recommend the Google Nexus 7 or the Nexus 10 or maybe the Samsung Galaxy Tab 4. These are all more recent or more up-to-date devices that, ones that you want to make sure you're using a more recent device that, again, has the latest operating system on it and also has the latest updated apps on it as well. So right now, if you're looking at your device list, you're thinking, okay, I need to have an iPad of some kind, I need to have an Android tablet of some kind, I need to have a Kindle Fire, I need to have a Kindle Paperwhite or a Kindle e-ink screen device. And all of these devices are very helpful for doing testing across all these different platforms. On the Nook or the Kobo, it's your call as to whether you get one of their e-ink screen devices. You don't have to have a Nook tablet because their tablet is essentially a Samsung tablet that's been rebranded. So you can just have a regular Samsung Galaxy tablet, or you can get a Nexus, Google Nexus tablet if you want. So you don't have to go the Nook route if you don't want to. But on their e-ink screen devices, it's really your call. If you're selling books to their stores, it's probably good to have those devices on hand, especially if you're starting to get responses or requests back from your readers saying, hey, I see something wrong in the Nook in this book. You need to be able to go test that. So your choice on whether you get those, though. On an iPhone or an iPad, it's completely your call. Again, just whether you have whether you want to have an iPad, an iPod, or an iPhone of some kind to test on. This may be more important if you're doing nonfiction or very complex content, because you want to make sure that you are testing on those devices to make sure that the smaller screen size doesn't negatively affect the ability to read the content in some way. For device updates, I can't recommend highly enough that you get the most updated version of your of the operating system and the apps that you're running. So you really need to know what operating system version and what app version you're testing on. To do this in, say, the iPad, you just go into the settings and go into the About This Device kind of section. It's the same on Android. It's going to be the same on most of these devices. And it'll tell you what the version, the operating system version is. So for iPad right now, it's going to be iOS version 9. For Google Android systems, it's going to be probably version 5 of some kind, 5 point something, and it's going to depend a little bit on what kind of device you have as to what you have on that device. But know where to go. Be able to go in and take a look, and also recognize if you're doing any kind of customer support, to ask your users, your readers who are reporting some sort of problem, ask them what version they're running as well, because you'll find out sometimes that they're running, I've got an iPad 1. Well, the iPad 1 can't be updated past iOS version 5.5. It doesn't accept iOS version 6, 7, 8, or 9. So it's so out of date now. It's going to be very difficult for someone, for your team, to create an ebook file that's going to look great on those devices that are older. These old versions of iOS, old versions of iBooks, and also on the newer ones where lots of changes have been made and things are all different. So know what app version and what iOS version or operating system version you're running. If you have a device, I would recommend you pull it out right now and just take a look at it and see what version you're running, just so you can kind of get a feel for how that works. It's always best to use the latest versions, but sometimes it's good to test on older versions as well. So when you do upgrade your devices, hold on to those old devices. Don't go trade them in or give them to your kid or whatever. Put them on the shelf and hold on to them. And when the time comes to go test a book and make sure it's going to work on older devices, then you'll have that available. Or if you get an error report from a reader, you'll know that you can go back to your iPad 1, take a look at it. Actually, if you look at my bookshelf at home, I've got half of a bookshelf full of devices. It's just all the old devices, all the way back to the old Kindle 1 sitting there on my bookshelf, so I can grab it and do testing with it if I need to. And this might also mean buying multiple devices. So you may actually have to have multiple copies, multiple iPads or multiple Kindles or whatever, just so you have them on hand for testing down the road. If you can't update the OS, then update the device. That's the rule. For emulators and apps, these are applications, these are programs you can install typically on your computer, but also on mobile devices to do testing and to load your books. And you can do sideloading into these applications just like you would into an actual, like a Kindle device or a Nook device. There are good ones and there are bad ones. iBooks on OS X Mavericks or later, you definitely want to have iBooks on your Macintosh if you're running a Mac system. It's a great way to just do testing. The Kindle Previewer, I mentioned this before. This is an emulator of the Kindle platform. It lets you open up Kindle or EPUB files and see what they would look like on different devices. This is also how you get the correct file to upload and sideload a Kindle file to your iOS Kindle app. So if you have Kindle for iOS and you want to test your ebook on the iOS for Kindle, you can't do that with a .mobi file. There's a file called the .azk, and you have to create that inside of Kindle Previewer. So there's a whole process for that. But Adobe Digital Editions is pretty good. Bluefire for Windows is also fairly good. These are just, they open up EPUB files. You can kind of quick and dirty take a look at things and see if things worked. But realize that a lot of readers are not going to be using those necessarily as their default device. Most readers will be reading on their iPad or on their Kindle or somewhere else. So don't take just Adobe Digital Editions as, okay, if it looks good there, it's fine everywhere, because that may not be the case. Let's talk about manual quality assurance, the process that you go through to manually load files and to test files, and what you should be looking for when you're doing that process. So first and foremost, the first thing you need to do when you open up a file on your computer, you've done making the EPUB, you just exported it from InDesign, or you just created it with whatever process you have, is compare that file to your source file and to the scope of work that you created at the beginning of the process. I highly recommend that as you're working through the production process, that the production team be in contact with the the acquisitions team or the editor who worked on the book. Make sure that whoever's doing the actual design knows what's expected. And in a small shop, this may be, two people that are, maybe it's one person. You're the editor and you're the production person. But make sure that there's communication happening, that at the beginning of a book process, when you're first starting out with acquiring a book or publishing a book, that you write down the ideas that you've got about what you want it to look like, what you want it to function like. And if there's any way to get an ebook developer or manager of the ebook department involved in those acquisitions conversations, then I highly recommend doing that. But when you sit down to do the actual QA, open up the original source file, so a PDF of the print book or the original manuscript if that's all you're starting with or whatever, and also a list of whatever the scope of work was, what do we expect this ebook to look like or function like. This means you need to have the source file open. You need to be familiar with it too, which means more than likely taking a couple minutes at least as a designer, as a QA person, to walk through that print book and see what the print book looked like, and to look at headings and figure, okay, so I need to get a feel for what the design is. I need to get a feel for how the images were handled. I need to get a feel for what the content of the book is, even, so I can recognize if chapter 4 is missing for some reason. I can kind of catch that as I'm doing my QA. So get familiar with that source file. Review similar projects. So if there's a series of books and you're doing QA on number 5 in a book series, go back and look at the other books, both the print books and the ebooks that were created for those. And if you're doing a series that has been one book per year over the last 5 years, you may find that the first ebook that was created 5 years ago isn't nearly up to snuff with the quality of the books that you're creating now. Maybe your production process has changed, and that could you could benefit a lot from potentially going back and updating that older ebook to match, or just making sure that your current ebook for the new version, volume 5, doesn't stray too far away from the original, version 1, volume 1, so that they look similar enough that people can recognize that if they have both volumes sitting on their device. They're not going to be kind of surprised that it looks so different in the new volume. Look at the structure of the book. Look through the whole structure. Understand the table of contents. Look at the structure of how the chapters are named and how they're marked up. And look at the structure of the back matter. Does it have appendices? Does it have an index? Get familiar with the structure of the book. Look at the design. Look at all of those design features that we mentioned just a minute ago, images and tables and charts and lists and everything else. Get familiar with how those look and how those function in the book, as how readers would interact with them. Look at unique elements. If you have sidebars or anything special like that, make sure that you're aware of where those are in the book, and make a mental note or make a physical note to go and look at those pages in the ebook and double check and make sure that those unique things that are unique to this book really came through properly. And know the limits of the reading systems. Anytime that you're doing manual QA, when you're looking through that print book, your brain should be automatically flagging for you, oh, that's probably going to be an issue in the Kindle, or that's probably going to be an issue in just the ebook in general. Or, hey, I need to remember that I need to go look at images on page 25 because these images are done in a special pattern. I want to make sure that get captured properly in the ebook. And know how to recognize automation issues. If your production team or your outsourced vendor that's creating these ebook files uses automation to create them, so if there's some sort of process where a PDF is run through some sort of OCR program, which it still happens all the time today, be able to recognize that there's going to potentially be some problems, and keep an eye out for things that are I noticed that, noticed in doing one book that at the beginning of each paragraph they had changed all of the left double quotes, smart quotes that are supposed to go at the beginning of a sentence, that all of those were changed to right double quotes. And so that's an automation issue. It's somebody did the wrong kind of find and replace or the wrong kind of regular expression or something, and it broke the whole file. So keep an eye out for that. Know how to recognize those issues and how to communicate those to your production team. Some other general thoughts: test on all the devices you're targeting. If you're selling the book in the Kindle devices, make sure that, if it's through the Kindle store, then make sure that you're testing on the Kindle devices. Sometimes it works best to have all of them open to the same location at one time. This is really especially true if you're looking at headings in the book. You want to be consistent from device to device, or if you're looking at images or looking at some special unique content. Go put it on all of the devices, lay them out on the table in front of you, and look at that page across all of them and see what you might need to do to tweak it to make it look good for everybody. Do an overview. Look for content that's out of place. Look for content that's missing. You'll find sometimes that even when you're using InDesign or something, if somebody didn't do the export properly, that you'll have content that's that's shifted. Maybe they didn't anchor the image properly in the middle of the chapter in between paragraphs or something, so it got shifted to the bottom of the chapter. That's a fairly common issue in InDesign. Sometimes content will be completely missing because the articles panel that was used in InDesign didn't specify that this image should be included. So be aware of those issues and pay attention to what's missing or what's out of place. Look for page breaks that are properly placed between chapters. You should always break before the beginning of a new chapter, and in almost every case in an ebook. But if you've got other places that you want to break the page or break the HTML content up, make sure that those are placed in the right locations. Look for inconsistent formatting across the board. If you're looking at each chapter, chapters 1 through 20 in your book, and you notice that chapter 4 for some reason has a smaller font size, then there's a styling issue somewhere. So be aware of those inconsistent formattings. Let's talk about checklists, because a lot of the stuff, and these are just general things that I've been covering, but a lot of times you really are, maybe you yourself are not even the person doing the quality assurance. Maybe you have an intern doing it. Maybe you have multiple people who kind of trade out the position. And, sometimes if I'm too busy, I'm going to give it to my friend and my coworker, and they're going to go in and do the QA instead. It's really great to have in-house checklists that are consistent, that are used by you, the whole team, anybody that's doing QA, to ensure that everybody's checking the same things. Because it may be that somebody who's new or an intern who doesn't do it as often is being tasked with doing it, and you want to make sure that they don't miss something that you, as the person who normally does it, would normally catch. A really good one to start with is we have on the Flight Deck website, we have a handbook that has lots of good information, and one of those pages is a checklist. It's a kind of a default general checklist. You're welcome to go grab it. You don't have to have a Flight Deck account either. You can this is accessible to anybody on the web. So grab the checklist, copy it out, put it into a Word document or something, and just go through and tweak it to your heart's content. Add things to it, take away from it, however you like, because you want to adapt it to your needs and to what your publishing company is going to be doing and the types of content that you're working on. Following in the next couple of screens are a couple of high points about QA checklists. Some considerations, things you might want to consider adding or looking at and putting onto your checklist. Internal style guidelines. If you, as a publishing company, have style guidelines that are used by the editorial team, by the production team or typesetting or whatever, for how you handle em-dashes, how you handle spacing around quote characters and things, so how you handle typographical conventions and stuff. These are the kinds of things that you want to make sure get carried over into your ebooks to ensure that the ebooks are the same quality as the print book and you're not missing something, or that the conversion didn't do something weird. So look for internal style guidelines, make a list of those requirements, and make sure that they're included in your QA checklist. Default style sheets. If you're using, let's say you have a lot of fiction content and you want all of your fiction content to look exactly the same. This is true for sci-fi, for romance, for a lot of other genre fiction content. It's also true in a lot of nonfiction as well, where you have a consistent, maybe it's just a series of 10 books and you want to make sure that the whole series looks exactly the same. Make sure that you, as the QA person, know what you're supposed to be looking for, know to look for that default style guide, style sheet, and make sure that that style sheet's being applied to the ebook the way it needs to be. Unique styles or issues for different book genres. You may want to consider in your check sheet, your checklist, maybe having a different checklist for your fiction content than you have for your nonfiction. Or maybe you want to have one checklist that's a default for everybody, for every type of content that you do, and then a separate one that's kind of a split off from that for nonfiction or even for genre fiction that you have, or for maybe if you have nonfiction that's very complex or nonfiction that's not complex, and just have the ability to to have different types of checklists for potentially for different types of genres. You may be unique issues for fixed layout books. If you're doing iBooks Author as a potential format for doing eBooks, if you have comic books or any kind of really complex layout like that, if you're doing enhanced eBooks with video or audio or JavaScript or something else that's adding more to it, think about adding those to your checklists as well. Author or project-specific requirements. This kind of ties into what I mentioned earlier. You need to be aware as the QA person about what was happening early in the process, and if your acquisitions editor or the editor of the book thought through some ideas about how this project should look in the ebook, they should write that down, make sure that comes with the content, to the QA person, not just to the production team. So make sure that you know where they're tracked, and make sure that you have access to get access to those, and talk through what those project-specific requirements would be, and put that on your checklist so people don't forget when they're doing QA. Oh, I need to go check with the editor and make sure I know if there was anything special for this book. An internal list of common conversion issues. If you're using an outsourced vendor, you may actually see this happen on a regular basis, where for some reason this outsourced vendor always misses they don't do the headings the way we expect them to, or maybe it was an issue on a kind of an inconsistent basis. Maybe every other book that you get from them has this kind of consistent issue. And if you tried contacting them and saying, hey, can you make sure you're checking for this, they hopefully would work with you and start checking for it, but also add it to your checklist. And it doesn't hurt to have those things as another item on your QA checklist, just to make sure it doesn't get past your QA process as well. Conversion house limitations are also a problem if you're going really cheap on the conversion, and I do recommend, again, take a look at the webinar that we did last week about production, and talk about conversion houses and how to pick a good outsourced vendor. But if you have limitations because of cost or things like that, recognize what those limitations are that your conversion house is just not able to do, and make sure that you're putting in your QA checklist to go check those kinds of issues. Another thing you should consider adding to your checklist is accessibility, and I won't go really deep into this right now because we don't really have time, but definitely use the IDPF accessibility checklist on their website to create an accessibility checklist to ensure that your books are accessible, so that people who are vision impaired or are blind or have dyslexia or any other kind of disability can be able to use your content effectively and read your book the way you expect them to. A couple of resources that you should be aware of, some things that you can get some good help. I do highly recommend taking a look at the IDPF website. International Digital Publishing Forum is the organization that maintains the EPUB standard, so definitely look at their website. They have the whole spec for EPUB up there, lots of good information. They also have what's called the EPUB Zone, which is kind of a consumer-friendly or publisher-focused kind of zone or area website for publishers and production specialists. So they have good information and articles about EPUB, about production issues, and things that you should be aware of. EPUB 3 Best Practices is a book that's really good, got a lot of great information in there. You can purchase that or download it. And then the Book Industry Study Group is an organization that is involved directly in the creation of industry standards, and there are a lot of good information pieces on their website. I'm actually on a lot of the committees that create these documents that help publishers understand more about fonts, more about fixed layout. We're working on one right now about accessibility. There's a lot of good information and good resources you can download for free, even from the BISG website. BISG also has the EPUB 3 support grid that's available at epubtest.org. This is a industry-level project where everybody's contributing to try to help publishers understand and know what different reading systems support for EPUB 3 features. So if you want to know, hey, does the Nook tablet such-and-so version support video content, you can go and look it up on the epubtest.org. It's a great idea for trying to figure out in the planning stage even, or definitely in QA, figure out where you should go testing things and what devices will have what kind of support for especially those more important or helpful features of EPUB 3. BSG also has a field guide to fonts and eBooks and fixed layout for eBooks. These are two that I just mentioned a moment ago. Direct links here in the presentation for you to go click on to go grab those resources. I've mentioned these resources before. The eProduction group on Twitter, on Facebook. There's a wiki as well. EPUB Secrets is a great blog. These are all, and 99 Problems is a list of known issues in ebook devices, and a very open way for you. If you run into a problem, you've tested something, you know it's broken in the reading system, you're like, I want every other ebook developer out there to know that this is a problem. You can go and post it on 99 Problems. You may actually hear back from somebody who says, oh no, I found a solution to that problem. Here's the solution I found. Or at the very least, everybody will be aware that that issue is not is broken in that device. These are all great resources for anybody who's doing ebook production, or if you're doing QA as well. Highly recommend that. And I also have a GitHub page for myself with sample EPUB files that you want to check out as well. EPUB 3 accessibility guidelines, accessible publishing, accessible EPUB 3, which is a great book, and then top tips for creating accessible EPUB 3 files. These are all accessibility resources that I do highly recommend that you use when you're creating your ebook files and testing your ebook files. So that's the end of our presentation, and I think we'll switch over now. And if anybody has any questions, we can take those questions and just type them into your little chat window, and we'll read those off and help everybody out with any questions you've got.
We have a couple already, Joshua. Is epubcheck 4.0 backwards compatible? So if a store uses 3.0, would it still?
Yes. Yeah, so the epubcheck actually will test EPUB 2 or EPUB 3 files. So it's the great thing, even epubcheck 3, the most, the last version actually had some EPUB 3 checking capabilities as well. But epubcheck 4 has much more enhanced capabilities. It does a lot better job of catching issues, specifically in EPUB 3 files. But yes, it does support EPUB 2 as well.
Okay, thank you. What version of ADE do you recommend?
My recommendation is actually probably going to be to use both ADE3 and ADE4. And it's frustrating because you don't really want to have both, but Adobe Digital Editions 4 has support for EPUB 3, so the more recent version of ADE is going to support EPUB 3. And it also supports fixed layout and some other things. But you'll find, especially the Nook is still running essentially the ADE3. It's running the ARM SDK on its devices that is equivalent to Adobe Digital Editions 3. So if you want to kind of get a quick and dirty, will this work okay design-wise on the Nook, using ADE3 on your desktop to kind of quick and dirty test it might be a good idea. And sometimes you'll run into error reports from users because a lot of times your readers don't actually update to the latest version of Adobe Digital Edition. So you may want to keep a version of ADE3 on your desktop just for testing.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a resource for the most used readers?
There isn't really any like industry level study that's been done to say who has, what reading system is the most used. From anecdotal evidence, just talking to publishers and talking to other ebook developers and talking to people who who see these things, iPads are very common in the marketplace. A lot of people have iPads, and a lot of people read books on their iPad, even if they buy it from Amazon. So the Kindle app on the iPad is going to be probably a pretty high priority for testing on. Again, there's a special process for loading those files into the Kindle app for the iPad, but you can definitely do that. iBooks on an iPad is a good thing to do, and then Kindle devices themselves, and even the Nook devices. And my recommendation too is if you're out in the wild, you're walking around the mall, or you're sitting on an airplane or whatever. If you see somebody who's reading an ebook, ask them what kind of device they have. And you'll probably find that a lot of people are reading on their phones. A lot of people read on their iPhone or on their, on their Android phone. So you may actually, think, okay, especially our complex content, we really need to be testing on the phone devices to make sure that the design looks really good. But no, there's no knowledge and no study that I know that actually has that kind of information. But it's mostly anecdotal at this point.
Okay, thank you. A few more actually. Do you have a resource of what reader supports what char sets?
What character sets? I don't have a chart. There's no chart that I know of that specifically gives, for every device what character sets are supported. I will say that with EPUB 3 especially, if the device is supporting EPUB 3, then there's a requirement in EPUB 3 that foreign language content be supported. Now, how that's supported, how well it's supported, will differ from device to device. But if you're looking at European languages that use a Latin alphabet, it won't be a problem for almost any device that's out there. You may on some really specially complex, if you're using, there's some European languages and even some Asian languages. I think Thai actually uses the kind of a interesting variant of the Latin alphabet. But on the really complex stuff, yeah, you'll run into some problems. You're more likely to run into problems with right to left character sets, so Hebrew, Arabic, languages like that have a right to left character direction.
Okay.
But support for that is actually increasing tremendously with EPUB 3. It was one of the main things that EPUB 3 fixed. So it definitely shouldn't be a problem for most devices unless you get really complex.
Good. Understanding that we can't make successful ebook files for all devices and versions, do you have any suggestions about accommodating customers with older readers? Does any specific retailers which devices are not compatible?
The best way to support older devices is to do QA, and in your production process to use different style sheets and different media queries to really help older devices get the styling information that they can recognize and can work with. It's called backwards compatibility or graceful degradation, and you can do some searching online for this as well. There's a couple of good resources. The problem is that there's never going to be a perfect mix, right? You're always going to have some sort of device that just doesn't work, no matter how much you try. There's a point at which I personally have told publishers and told readers, look, we can't support a Kindle 1. It's just not possible to make it look perfect on a Kindle 1 device or on an iPad 1 with iOS 5.5. There are just so many differences between that older device and the newer devices that are out there that's just not possible to completely match all of those styles up and make sure that it looks perfect everywhere. But you can get a lot of that taken care of by just being very thoughtful about your style sheets, making sure you're using media queries where those are supported. Some devices support them, some don't, but using some graceful degradation techniques and using good HTML markup. That's actually one thing that a lot of people don't recognize, is that if you use good markup, you're marking your headings as headings, your paragraphs as paragraphs, and using good kind of base HTML, then older devices that don't really support CSS as well, they're more likely to fall back into kind of a default mode with that good HTML that's going to look better. So I don't know that there's a silver bullet to fix it all, but if you take some care in your production, especially in creating good books in the production phase, then you should be able to mitigate most of those issues.
Thank you so much. I think you answered all the questions for today. If you have any others, you can email them to Patricia, who sent out the WebEx email, webinar email, or Joshua directly if you want to state your email address for the audience. Yeah,
it's joshua@firebrandtech.com. Or if you just go to, just send it to Patricia or send it to me, and feel free to contact us at any point to get more information, answer any questions you've got.
Okay, thank you so much. Finished right on time. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.